Hi everybody, today I want to talk about some of the things inside of our succession plan that cause a lot of stress on people, and that is differences between people and their personalities. So one of the things that we're constantly working on when we're working on succession planning is family harmony, and can we improve our ability to work well together? When that's not a focus inside of succession planning, then all the other things can be somewhat problematic, because it's really hard to keep a group of people together when we're not really focused on the people themselves. So our belief that differences are bad can sometimes lead to some really unfortunate things inside of family groups. One is that differences can often be criticized. And as we know, sometimes when there gets to be a lot of criticism happening, that sort of snowballs into some other behaviors that are not very good for the overall health of a family. The second thing that can happen when differences are seen as something that's bad is that we can really get a lot of triangulation happening. And I know I talk about that a lot because that's just a really common phenomena amongst people, is that we tend to like to talk about the things we're unhappy about with people who are not actually involved in it. And so that gets triangulation happening, which is really, really unhealthy inside of family groups that work together. The third thing that can happen is that the family member may be labeled as different or difficult. So when someone gets labeled that way, it's really hard to figure out a workaround to working well together. Instead, we tend to sort of isolate them. So the challenge is when this starts to occur, and for most family groups, it does occur. I mean, let's face it, there are no perfect families who are working in perfect harmony with each other all the time. But the challenge becomes is when we start assigning our own interpretations to the behaviors of others, then we have this thing that happens where we try to fill in the gaps. And what we don't really know or understand, then we make it up. So we make up an explanation for what we believe that we are seeing. So when there's no framework or history for having conversations to deepen understanding, most people just don't know how to approach the opportunity. And what ends up happening is we get a lot of families that use this term: that's just the way they are. Now, that might be fine because maybe it's something that's not causing a lot of disharmony. It might not really be causing much of a disruption at all. But the unfortunate thing is when somebody is labeled like that, then we're not really able to tap into some of the strengths that that person may be providing for the good of the group and the good of the operation. So as we've talked about in other videos, the more you know before you ever start your succession planning process, the easier it is to keep everyone on the same page and working together. So when we work with families, we use personality profiles every single time, and we use that as part of our very beginning work with a family. So that becomes really critical for us because we don't get to have the opportunity to go and work on your operation for an extended period of time. So we don't oftentimes get to see how these personalities show up when they're stressed or when they're angry, when things aren't going well, when the pace speeds up. So we rely really heavily on personality profiles to help us understand what that could potentially look like so that we're navigating that group in a way that minimizes all of that. So some of the things that we like to use profiles for are to understand how people relate to each other. We look at how adaptable they are to change. We look at how much detail they require to make decisions, or in terms of the process for which they organize the way they work. We also like to understand what drives them. So some of the drivers for humans are ambition, leadership, responsibility. Some people are really driven by acquiring or receiving praise from other people, so that we want to really understand what motivates a person. We also want to understand how they manage stress and then how their emotions are displayed when they are stressed. And finally, we like to understand how important a leadership role is to each person. So when we start working with a group, when we understand that, it helps us to be more effective much quicker. Now, that will work for you as well as it does for us, because oftentimes families don't really understand what it is they're seeing when certain behavior is displayed. So in terms of personality profiles, you have a lot of choices. So you can go from the very, sort of easy and fun ones like StrengthsFinder or Colors, all the way down into some of the more robust profiles like DISC, Myers-Briggs, and Winslow. So I'll just encourage you that if you want to do a family sort of a family exercise together, pick one of the simpler ones. Do the StrengthsFinder. StrengthsFinder is actually really super fun because it only focuses on strengths. It doesn't really give you any of the underbelly of our personalities. Colors is also really fun. And then if you want to have a facilitated session, I'd really encourage you to get in touch with somebody who could help you with the DISC profile, Myers-Briggs, or like I said, the Winslow. So some of the benefits of this, because whenever I tell our farm families that we're going to use personality profiles, I kind of get some chuckles. I sort of might get a fearful look like, oh my gosh, what are you looking for? But here's what I will say about the use of personality profiles. Number one, it's super fun. It's really fun to take profiles together so that you can learn about each other. And oftentimes there just gets to be a lot of laughing because that behavior that is just the way they are is now understood. And so when we understand each other, it's easier to make adjustments and to allow people's personalities to be accepted rather than something we're working around. The second reason or second benefit for personality profiles is that the group is going to learn something about itself. So group dynamics can be very tricky things because there's just lots of stories being told. There's lots of rationale being made up for certain types of behavior. So the group will learn and the group will get better. But perhaps the most important thing about personality profiles is the benefit that each individual will get. So I have taken, I would not even want to guess how many personality profiles, and regardless of whether they are one of the lower level kind of fun ones all the way up to the very sophisticated profiles, I learn something about myself every single time. So when we are learning about ourselves, the most important thing that comes out of that is that when we personally understand why we do what we do, we can choose to manage ourselves better and we can choose to make those changes that are going to benefit the group overall and help our own personal performance be better. The other thing is that when you're working on things like accountability charts and job descriptions, profiles are really useful for helping to get the right people in the right seats. And that should be something that we are working toward all the time inside our operations, is to make sure that we are aligning talents with opportunities. So personality profiles can really help with that. Finally, I'm just going to end with this. When teams start to embrace differences, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for your operation. And this is really critical when we start talking about succession planning, because as we've talked about before, oftentimes the succession plan is going to open up the opportunity to expand your operation in order to make sure that it's remaining vital and vibrant in order to support future generations.